Welcome everybody. My name is Kristen Fletcher. I'm the Programs and Engagement Manager here at the Haley Public Library. And we hope by the end of this program that we will have achieved our mission to inspire discovery, connection, learning, and growth in our community. And you can actually give us some feedback if you would. There's a short survey on each chair. If you don't have a pencil, there's one over there by the box where you can drop your surveys in. But I read every single one of those surveys. Please feel free to suggest topics or presenters that you would be interested in. We're also especially interested in how you hear about these presentations. So it's just really great feedback for us. So before I introduce Hannah, I wanted to let you know that there are 3 ways that you can enjoy our programs. 1, you can come live and in person like you are right now. 2, this program is being live streamed on our YouTube channel. And 3, after this presentation, we're capturing a video right now. After the presentation, I do a little bit of light editing and then upload that to our website. So that's accessible. There's 3 different ways that you can enjoy our programs. I also wanted to tell you about some upcoming programs that I think this particular audience might be interested in. Tomorrow night, we're having 2 talks on beaver ecology and stream restoration in partnership with the University of Idaho Rinker Rock Creek Ranch. The first talk is going to be by Ed Galindo, who's the CEO of the North American Native Research and Education Foundation. The second one is Slow Water for Modern Watersheds with Eric Winford, who is the Associate Director of the University of Idaho Rangeland Center. So that'll be here starting at 5:30. Then next Tuesday in the evening, we're offering our final talk in the Living with Alzheimer's series. This one is entitled Effective Communication Strategies. And then the last one I want to mention to you is on Friday, July 27th, we're offering a slide tour of the universe with Dr. Joel Weisberg, who is the astronomer in residence for the Central Idaho Dark Sky Reserve. And he's going to take you from here to way out there. And that's all in prep for an observing night that we're offering on August 12th out Croy Canyon to look at the Perseid meteors. He's going to be a presenter there. Tim Frazier, who's a local astronomer, will be presenting. The AstroTac team from Boise State University will be there, and we've got some really cool telescopes lined up. So, so I hope that you'll join us for that. So without further ado, thank you for your attention. I would just like to introduce Hannah Harris, who is the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience Program Coordinator.
Awesome. Thank you to Haley Public Library, and thank you, Kristen, for the introduction and the update on all the awesome events that are happening in our community. Thank you all for coming out on such a beautiful evening to learn all about energy. I know it's a very nice night out there. Please hold questions until the end. We have lots of time at the end for questions, but we'll move through the panel and then have time for audience questions. So if you need to make a little note, please do that. Otherwise, just tuck it away for the end. We wanted to host this panel tonight as a part of our mission at the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience because we have kind of a unique opportunity in our community to move towards more resilient and renewable choices for energy systems. And this is important as an investment financially and with education and time because this will ensure that we have a safer community, a more economically efficient community, and a community with a much lower climate impact. So that's the purpose of the panel for this evening. I'll give a brief introduction to our panelists, and then I will let each of them add a little bit more to their bios if they'd like. And this is in alphabetical order by last name. And I'm going to use my cards because they all have lots of wonderful things about them. So this evening we have Rebecca Bundy, who is a green architect in the Sun Valley area. She specializes in custom homes and has worked as widely as Washington, California, and Colorado, in addition to regionally. She's been the proprietor of her own design firms for over 20 years and has worked previously for firms in the Seattle area as well as Munich, Germany. We also have Brad Houstonfeld, who is an Energy Policy Associate with Idaho Conservation League. He gave an excellent talk earlier today at lunchtime about energy policy and answered lots of great questions. And he advocates for responsible energy transitions and climate resilience before utility and state agencies. We also have Quinn Skillen, who is a lead solar designer and consultant with EGT Solar in the Boise area. And their mission is to promote affordable and reliable energy alternatives through careful, responsible education, ultimately modeling an ethics-based approach for a greener tomorrow. So Rebecca, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
So I started my studies in art and then switched into structural engineering and then landed in architecture, and I was like, never worked and never will. It's amazing. It's just, it's so fun and it's challenging and I really, really love it. I have degrees from the University of Washington and then went on to the Technical University of Munich and got a master's in architecture there, and which was just really incredibly eye-opening because I learned so much about thinking small and thinking how people everywhere have the same needs, their outdoor space, their privacy, but you can do it smaller. And so then brought those ideas back to the States and took it from there.
Excellent. Quinn?
I grew up in San Diego. My parents were very early adopters in solar, so I got to kind of see that as a kid. We had a big garden in San Diego as well. I think that's where my passion for renewable energies and just kind of like living off of what you have started. Went to Boise State, finished there, loved Boise, kind of fell in love with the outdoors as well, and then got the opportunity to get into the renewable space. And obviously there's a future there for it monetarily, but also I think it's just the correct way that we should be moving our economy and our planet in general. So super stoked to be here and hopefully I learned something and hopefully I can give you guys some information as well.
Yeah, and again, Brad Houstonfeld, and my path to this chair was decidedly not straightforward. You know, it's been a decade or so since I lived in Idaho previously, and before that it was school in Washington, and before I was an energy nerd, I was actually a chemist, and straight out of school got a gig with EPA doing oil spill response and stuff like that, which is a pretty bananas gig to get at age 22 or 3. And then after that was decidedly something less professional in Moab, Utah, some hydrology in New Mexico, and influential supervisor sort of pressed me to sort of go into policy. You know, we did a lot of work in gas fields, we did a lot of work with pueblos, and ran into a lot of environmental problems that were technically not that hard to solve, but politically, socially very difficult. So take a left turn into law school like so many people do, and 3 years later you wind up back in Idaho doing energy work. So here I am with Idaho Conservation League. It's been a fast year, but it's been a good year, and it is a deep, deep pool to swim in. So we're just starting, but there's so much work to be done the next decade, and it's really a privilege to be able to do so.
Thank you. So we'll start with a couple of questions for each panelist, and then I'll ask a couple of discussion questions that will be open to all of our panelists to answer, and then we'll open it up to audience questions. So our first questions are for Rebecca, and our first question for you is, what inspired you to focus your designs and business around sustainability?
I think it's always been part of me. I was raised in a family that had very environmental values, and even when you went car camping, you had to car camp with your backpacking gear, because it's just, and I had to learn driving a car when we were going someplace. You couldn't take an extra trip ever, so my brothers were always in the back seat. But and then in school I had the privilege of studying with some professors that were involved in indigenous design with indigenous materials and in response to the local climate. Both schools I attended had programs where we learned about passive solar. But then in my career, it really took off when I had a client with chemical sensitivities, and so we were dealing with indoor air quality. And that was the late 1990s, and I was introduced at that time to the concept of green building. And Telluride had a green building. It wasn't a code at that time, it was a standard or a guide. And so discovered that, used that to design my home in Hewlin Meadows when we first moved here, and been involved in it ever since.
That's awesome. And our next question is, how can designing and building for sustainability, when you are first, constructing and designing a home from scratch, how can that, from doing that from the outset, better optimize energy usage, for example, as opposed to retrofitting a home?
Right. When you're doing it from the beginning, you can really incorporate it into the design, think about all of the implications, the cost benefit of what you're doing, and so all of your decisions are working towards a goal. And if you're doing that, so you're realizing, oh, if I build smaller, I'm using less building materials, I'm going to heat less space. What if I use a totally go electric and use all of heat pump systems? What are the implications of that? How will that affect my utility bills? What will that affect? And the interesting thing is, when you go that route, you're not retrofitting, you're really hardly spending any more. You're just making decisions that are based on a good outcome, a good long-term outcome that you want to see. Some things cost a little bit more upfront, but they generally pay for themselves over time, and they pay for themselves often in comfort levels. Also, from the beginning, there are a lot of programs, federally and locally and with our utilities, incentive programs that you can take advantage of. So, for instance, on some of my projects, we've been able to take advantage of a $1,500 Idaho Power incentive, where if you go all electric, then you can get this $1,500, which pays for the energy consultant and often pays for then part of the costs of those upgrades. So there's a lot of advantages to planning ahead.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I think that's especially important to think about in our community, because with so many codes and restrictions around building out, right, into the mountains, which has its pros, right, that means that there's a lot of development happening in terms of, tearing down older buildings. Ketchum is full of holes right now. And so as we continue to rebuild things, that's especially...
I've had clients ask me, well, what's the greenest building I could build? And I hate to tell them, but living in a yurt would be greener.
Yeah.
But they don't usually want to hear that.
Yeah, yurts are wonderful. And then passing it off to Quinn, what are the biggest benefits to retrofitting and incorporating solar specifically on our own residential properties? And then as a follow-up to that question, does it seem like there will be increasing value to solar energy over time?
Yeah, so I think the biggest advantage to adding solar to your home or small business, small commercial, whatever it is decentralizing the grid, right? So that's been an issue for a long time, and that's why Idaho Power has a monopoly, is because before rooftop solar was really an option, the grid is all centralized. It's all owned by one company. There is only like one or two sources coming from it, right? Hydro or burning coal. And so not even just personally if you're putting it on your home, but it stabilizes the grid in general, right? You're adding power generation on each one of these roofs. So I think that's a huge advantage. And then obviously with Idaho Power increasing rates significantly, not only does it make financial sense, but it makes a whole lot of sense just for the planet as well. I'm sure you guys, we're all probably very similar people that want to move the economy in that way. So I think those are the two biggest benefits. There is, going on the second question of added value, solar panels do degrade over time, right? So as the sun beats down on solar panels, they become less efficient. So like a car or any other asset, that system does get depreciated over a certain scale. Now, in the industry, it typically is measured on a 25-year scale, right? So you're measuring these efficiencies of these systems on assuming that the sun is going to beat down on them every day over 25 years. And typically the technology nowadays is so reliable that they're still going to be producing like 92% of their original power in year 25. So a lot of people, right, one of our things that I deal with every day is the upfront cost of solar, which is expensive. You're paying for 25 years of power on a single check. But the long-term benefits of avoiding utility costs, not incentivizing Idaho Power by giving them your money, right? We have a choice of where we can spend our money to essentially as a vote of what we believe in as well. And so I think that's a huge advantage. And then the benefit of knowing that your power and your generation is coming from a renewable source, right? We have the sun, this incredible, powerful thing in our sky that can generate a ton of electricity for us. And you know that now you have a generator on top of your home and you're producing a ton of energy that's clean for the next 40 plus years, which I think is super cool.
Awesome, thanks. And then Brad, how are energy policies changing currently at state and federal levels? So when we think about, I don't know, probably most of you are familiar with the Utilities Commission decision regarding solar power. You know, they're kind of back and forth with Idaho Power. So when we think about creating incentives for residential solar and other renewable energy, you know, even on a municipal level, can you tell us a little bit about how those policies are changing at the state and federal level right now?
Sure, and I think the word to focus on is policies. So the electrical grid and the regulatory system around it are immensely complex. There is not an energy policy in the country. There are 51 plus. So we have the federal policy, which is rapidly shifting its industrial capacity with the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, towards renewables. So that is phenomenal in so many ways, and we could talk about that for hours if we so choose. But I think this talk is largely geared to Idaho, and within those 50 different state policies, we have our own. And so they all develop differently, and they're all regulated by different bodies. Ours is the Public Utility Commission, where I represent ICL, ostensibly conservation and environmental values with the climate bent, and occasionally when I can, customer values as well. So that's my practice area, and we try to influence that towards renewable integration. And the big change, if there's one unifying theme across all these systems, it's the revolution of renewables. To say that the cost shifting between fossil fuels and wind and solar is impactful is an understatement. You know, solar power and wind together are the cheapest power ever produced by a long shot, and that is making these incentives come across. So specifically the question about net metering and rooftop solar, Idaho Power has been engaged in a process to change its net metering, sort of a one-to-one exchange, watt for watt, in, out on a rooftop system, to a credit-based operation. And so, you know, years ago in 2018, there was a settlement process that ultimately fell through. ICL was engaged in that with others, including the solar industry. And then what came out of that failed settlement was the study docket, which I think many of you were engaged in. I know several of you wrote in last year at our asking or on your own will, which is excellent. More public participation, the better. But so that study came across. It's all about the value of solars. It's dollars and cents. We were sort of precluded from talking about carbon values like that. Reliability was sort of shunted off to the side. So this is hard finance. This is spreadsheets. It is mean. It is turgid. And I would argue there's more than one answer, but it came across and the study was accepted. So where we're at now is an implementation docket that we're now seeing come across with this general rate case. As the rates are changing for everyone, the program parameters of net metering and this export credit system will change. And some of it is good and some of it is bad. There are things that I deeply applaud the company for taking the steps for, like lifting the system cap is an immense step forward that we can perhaps talk about later. We will move to a credit-based system, so that one-to-one is likely going to be, the docket is still active, but I think we can expect to move towards sort of instead of a one-to-one, a different rate for solar exports than usage as a customer. And with that will be a time of use rate. So power will be less valuable when fewer people are using it during the day and morning hours, and then it will peak at 20 cents or so kind of in the evening hours when people are coming home to their residences and residential demand really shifts in. And so it's going to change the dynamics. The ultimate financial viability of the distributed solar industry is hard to put a one-word statement on, but it is changing. We're engaged in it. We are picking around the corners to see how we can optimize it going forward, but it's a complicated one, and it's probably what I'll be neck deep in until about November, December or so.
And one more question for you before we move on to questions for all of the panelists. So we can encourage, municipal development to be green, sustainable architecture. We can choose that if we're looking to build our own residential properties. We can choose solar. We can look into financial resources and incentives, tax incentives to invest in solar. On a policy level, what is the best way to go about influencing policies that strategically support renewable energy? And how would you suggest people think about conservation concerns or this sort of growing NIMBYism, which for folks who aren't familiar with that term, it stands for not in my backyard. So when we think about where power is coming from and how that's changing, what's the best way to make our voices heard?
Yeah, and I think we're all used to power happening somewhere else. Mm-hmm. We've grown up around a centralized system with big companies operating big plants somewhere else with fossil fuel extracted from a different state far away. That's changing. We are no longer these balkanized little islands of an electric grid. It's going to be more integrated. We're all going to be a part of it. And I would encourage all of you guys to imagine yourselves as part of the energy grid instead of a customer. So, that time of use concept. Can you change your behaviors to be more optimized around when those renewables are producing well in the morning and evening hours, and to perhaps shift load to more slack hours when it's more available? So you think the only way to solve climate change, or the most credible way to solve climate change, is to electrify everything. So if it burns, it's got to go. Gas stoves, cars, internal furnaces, the rest. And that's daunting. That's hard. Undeniably, it is the most complicated industrial project ever. But with that gives you flexibility. We can decide when to charge our cars, when to cool our houses, when to run our appliances and everything like that. So that is going to become a bigger part of all of our lives as being a part of this grid. And I think to the question of NIMBYism, being a part of that grid is recognizing that it will be around us. It may be on our rooftops. I don't think the entirety of the grid can survive on a rooftop. We will need centralized renewables. We will need big megawatt scale, gigawatt scale renewables across the landscape. And how do we live with that is a really hard question. All energy exacts a natural, a resource toll, and a social toll. So how do we behave around that? We will see windmills or turbines on the horizon. We will see increasing numbers of solar arrays in lands, on farms, and unused acreage. So how do we react to that? And I think the mindset that I find encouraging is we are part of the energy system. It is our responsibility to maintain it, to be engaged, and to understand that to solve climate change, some of that responsibility happens elsewhere in this big regulatory policy and economic space, and some of it comes to us to be supportive of it. And there's good siding, there's bad siding, and the only way we get to good siding is to be engaged and be willing to understand that change will happen.
Thank you so much.
I can add to that a little bit too.
Yeah.
Some good ways just to get involved is the PUC does have open comments. You can send comments in there, show up to the hearings, make your voice heard. I think, and then like I said earlier, just your pocket. Also, Idaho Power, this whole thing is coming on because they can see what's happening, right? Renewables are going to take away their revenue. They've had a monopoly for forever. It's dollars for them. if they see their revenue going down and you guys have the ability to influence other people around you on where they're spending your money and where all of your hard-earned cash is going, I think that also makes a statement. So keep that in mind as well.
Great. So at this point, I'll start answering or asking questions that any of our panelists can answer. So the first question is, what are some innovations, practices, or policies that you are excited about in the next 10 years? So thinking about a 10-year horizon, what makes you hopeful? Very encouraging.
I'll start. I'm actually super excited, especially in Idaho, about like agrivoltaics, so incorporating solar systems into farming culture. And if our climate does keep getting hotter and crops can't withstand like certain temperature ranges, how do we incorporate like solar shading in order to help crop yield, but also generate power that these farms can use? So I think that's super fun. That's getting researched a lot more in Europe and over here as well. We do have one over in Twin Falls. So I think that's a really cool area that you can start to research and look into, as well as policy. Like Brad said, with the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a ton of money available through the Renewable Energy for America program. It's called the REAP grants. And so that's any rural business, depending on how much money you make, and any sort of agriculture producers. There's $1.9 billion available to transition to renewable energies. And I think that's being hugely missed in southern Idaho. Like, we are not taking advantage of that at all. And that really gets me excited, because almost everywhere outside of Boise, Nampa, Meridian, Caldwell-ish is all available for, or qualifies for, this grant funding. So I think that's something that the community really can take advantage of. Every single building here, if you own commercial real estate, you can, and you run a business out of it, you can qualify for that grant program. I'll help you write the grant. But that's something that I think is really exciting in the future for our industry, at least, that I can see applied in southern Idaho, which is pretty cool.
And just to tag on that, as far as the Inflation Reduction Act goes, there's a lot of money for energy retrofits. So it's pretty exciting. Like 30% of the cost, don't quote me exactly, but of, for instance, putting in new insulation in your attic, keep you cool in the summer, keep the house warm in the winter. So there is, and for installing, for a homeowner to install solar. So there's some really great tax credit money there. In architecture, I think the most exciting thing for me right now is the whole discussion about embodied carbon in our building materials, and there are actually free calculators available online now. I haven't had a client willing to pay for it yet, and I haven't had the time to just do it for fun, but it's something that I do pay attention to, and I'm really excited about doing a project where I actually calculate all that stuff. But even not calculating it, we know that, for instance, the spray foam insulation that everybody loves to use has the solvent-based insulation has a 95-year payback. I mean, you will never in your lifetime reap the gains that went into making that stuff. And yes, they've got water-based now, which are better, and they're continuing to work on that. But if you do cellulose insulation or hemp insulation, cellulose is almost zero. Hemp is actually a carbon sink and is a good thing to put in your walls. So I think that's just, it's super exciting, and I think sort of one of the next frontiers for architects.
And I would love to plug, while you just mentioned that we actually have a regionally based company called Hempitexture that was founded by two local guys. It's an amazing company. They just won a huge grant in New York City at a kind of climate competition, and they also just opened a huge plant in Jerome. But if you're not familiar with Hempitexture, definitely check them out. If you're thinking about doing any sort of building they're a great resource.
There's so much to say. The energy transition is happening. It may look like it's coming slow, but it is coming, and it will speed up. And I think the core miracle truly is the engineering progress on solar panel composition and how big them wind turbines are getting. Those are the two breakthroughs that are going to save us from climate in the long run, or the worst of it at least. Kind of onto the wonkier side, you know, this split regulatory system with 50 states doing 50 things drives me nuts sometimes. The upshot is you get a lot of good experiments, and you know, advanced policies like smart grid technologies, battery integration, time of use rates, critical peak pricing. The states that have adopted them on full scale or pilot programs, really, really, really encouraging results across the board. And so these ideas that have sort of stewed around for 2 decades as maybe viable, maybe a little radical, maybe, you know, kind of like left field advocate talk, they're real. And they have huge cost savings for people. They have huge cost savings for the utilities, and they allow for renewable integration at scales that, you know, 10 years ago, I don't think many people thought would have been possible. So we know what to do. Like, we have the ideas, we have the programs, we have the know-how. Do we have the political will? Do we have the financial muscle? Do we have the bravery to change a system that has worked for 120 years, but has to change, and has to change fast? And so I find a lot of encouragement in, you know, both the technical side, knowing that these physical engineering systems work, and the financial social systems behind it, and the behavior changes bear out. So that's what I gotta say.
Thank you.
I think it's exciting being in communities like this too, like you guys have. I don't always think of it on huge scale. Like, you guys have control of like these kind of microclimate communities also, where you guys have the power to go change policy here too and set an example statewide, right? I think that's super cool, and it's doable in, like, sometimes it feels overwhelming if you think about the entire state or southern Idaho as one, but as soon as you get people like yourselves in small areas that can actually make a change, I think that's encouraging. And it encourages creative behavior, right? Like, it's been the same for 130 years. We have new tools. Let's change it. What's the most creative way we can think about it? And I think that's fun.
So that's a great lead into our next question that's also open to all of our panelists, which is, what is one energy-related topic that you think people in the Wood River Valley, so regionally here, or in general, should take the time to learn more about?
Reprints, how to use those, how to apply for them, where you can, I mean, they make the most financial sense ever if you qualify for it. It's ridiculous. Like a $50,000 solar system, if you use the depreciation, your accountant knows what they're doing, and you get the grant money, it's like $1,000 out of your pocket. So small business owners, if you guys are connected to the community, people that have large tax liabilities, get them educated on the fact that this is available to them. You guys are in a little unique scenario with snow load and other stuff that we have to deal with, like engineering-wise, building these systems, but the money's there, and it makes more than financial sense.
In the immediate, would really encourage you guys to look into your billing options. It seems wonky, and it seems weird, and it seems niche. In aggregate, it can have a huge impact on the grid. You know, the less power that we use and the more efficiently we use it, the less likely it is that we build a new gas plant in Idaho, which is on the table. And so the more that we can adapt to this time of use rates and optimize our lives and our behaviors, and ultimately our, as weird as it sounds and as like sort of like boring as it is, customer billing accounts for your utility to renewable integration, that's a huge step towards reducing our collective carbon impact in this state. There are other ways, certainly, and they will come up, but in the immediate, time of use rates. Check out what those schedules look like for Idaho Power. They're opt-in right now or will be shortly. I would encourage you to see if they're viable for your situation.
Off of time of use real quick, if your friends are installing solar or you know people that are installing, make sure that if it's not south, it's facing west. That's when you'll get the most payback for your guys' production that you're sending back into the grid. It's also when you'll be using most of your power in the summertime. So I would, if you see stuff going up around the community, I would just highly suggest keeping it south or west facing if possible.
And I think that a really important topic that folks should be thinking about in their homes is what the health implications of using gas. And this is something, you know, I think we didn't know 10 years ago. But gas is a huge methane producer, so it's very, very concerning carbon-wise. But your individual health, when you turn on the gas burners on your stove, when your gas-fired furnace fires up, is releasing terrible toxins into your home. And I think that it's just not commonly understood, and something that people need to inform themselves about, and think about that as a huge reason to start to electrify.
And so that was one thing that people should learn more about and become more knowledgeable about. If people were to come away from this panel discussion and contribute in, you know, the most impactful way, what would you say is one way that you'd like people to contribute to energy resiliency in the region or in Idaho or in general?
I think a huge missed opportunity in our communities is retrofitting, energy retrofitting your homes. And we took advantage of what was called a CARP grant. It was an Obama administration grant in the Great Recession. Spent $4,000 and was able to get 50% back from the federal government, but cut our consumption just by doing that by 50%, or I'm sorry, 25% in that. And so as part of that, we got an energy audit, and then we've been chipping away at the items on the audit over the years, and we're down to about a 50% reduction in our energy usage in our home, with absolutely no impact on our standard of living. So if you can't do an energy audit, you can go online, and there are home energy audits to do. There are things that cost virtually nothing: caulking, changing out your light bulbs, that are a great step towards reducing your consumption and reducing your energy bills. And it's a thing that the cities can mandate codes for new construction, but I think retrofits is really something that folks need to take on for themselves. There is also a loan program at the State Office of Energy and Mineral Resources, and as I said, there's money in the Inflation Reduction Act for retrofits, and a great opportunity.
Yeah, I would say for me, I think it's just education, right? It's educating the community, showing kids, or having schools, classes about how you change your behavior, how do you reduce what you're using, how do you just live like more efficiently as a human being in our society, which I think is also, it's just cool to use less than other people, or changing behaviors because you know it's something that's like, it's just a more educated decision to make. So I think that's a big one. I think educating, and then if we can get solar on schools, and then if they can have like their live apps and see like, oh, okay, what it's producing today, and just trying to integrate that into the future of our community, I think would be huge. And then voicing your opinion at the PUC, I think, is the best thing.
Yeah, and I think we've spoken well to individual behaviors. I think that's half of the equation, and I think that the other one is collective. And what does that need? It's a cliche, but to be engaged, to show up to events like this, to speak to family and friends. You know, it's more complicated than this, but in short, energy policy is climate policy. It is the pressing issue of our century, of our generation going forward. And so to be engaged with how you interact with that and how our politics interacts with that, I think is critical and will be. So write the letters, have the conversations, be engaged, read up. And I know that there are so many demands on our time, attention, focus, care, money, etc. I think that this is one worth, in the long run, investing in, certainly. I will be for my career, and I know others will be. I encourage everyone, not just, you know, the Thursday evening library attenders to recognize that we are all participating in this system. You know, no longer is it a company distant, but we are part of the energy system, and I think that that engenders empowerment, and it also engenders responsibility to voice yourself, to show up, to organize, and to be engaged.
Thank you. We're going to shift into audience questions, and we have ample time for that, so I hope you all have been listening and thinking of questions. Before we jump into questions, I do have one thing. Thank you, Bill, for your patience. Scott and I had a great meeting earlier this week with a staff member at Canopy Climate, and they recently did a presentation at the Sun Valley Forum. They're kind of an up-and-coming consulting sort of community organization company that allows you to do an energy audit of your home just with information about your appliances, your, the make of your car, the year that your home was built, and I participated in the program ahead of the meeting and was really impressed. They give you a sort of rundown, suggestions that you can make to retrofit your home, to switch to electric appliances, and they also have an option for a consultation. So if you'd like to speak to somebody within their company to talk about your options and financing, contracting that's available in your area, that's an option. They also have this great program that allows people to audit and aggregate data as a community. And so Climate Action Coalition, I think, is planning on doing that. And so folks in our community will have the chance to put their information in and then sort of track and look at the aggregate data. And if you want to be competitive about it, you can. But you can definitely also cheer each other on and support our community in shifting our energy choices and our energy behavior. So I wanted to make everyone aware of that because I think it'll be really great, a really great tool to use, even just on an individual basis. And again, that's Canopy Climate, if anyone wants to write it down. And with that, we'll open it up to audience questions. I'm going to repeat the question so that when folks go back to watch this online, they can hear it loud and clear. Yes?
It's not a question, but a statement that goes to what we've been talking about. When I have had solar panels for approximately 8 years and had met a lot of negativity. Why are you doing this? It's not cost effective. Why? But in the conversation, to make it short, when I tell them I have a $5.29 surcharge is all it costs me, they sort of stop and start listening in a different vein.
Yeah.
Just that little symbol, $5.29, resonates to them, and they start thinking in a different vein.
Thank you. Yeah, so that comment was from an audience member, and it was a testament to the power of investing in solar and how really over time it does pay for itself, and it's an excellent investment, not only for the climate, but also for your budget. Other questions? Yes?
I'm interested about the Canopy Climate. I thought this question was going to be for Quinn, but maybe it might be for Rebecca, to dive just a little more down into retrofits. Now, if you're an architect or a science teacher or an engineering professor, something like that, you can go out and you can know maybe what to do. But when you look at heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, you're dealing with an HVAC contractor. Solar, you're dealing with a solar installer. Smart panels and upgrades to the amperage, you're dealing with an electrician. It seems like there's kind of a challenge, but maybe also an opportunity in that, what or when will there be contractors that can bundle these services instead of having, one person that parses out all these things that can wrap all this stuff? That seems to be kind of lacking or getting up to speed still in the marketplace. Take advantage of these tax credits. Is that true? Are there contractors that are bundling more of these things? Do there need to be?
So Bill's question was about retrofitting your home and the ease of access to contractors and knowledge about retrofitting. We have all of these different specialists who do various kinds of construction and retrofitting, and there seems to be a challenge in finding a contractor who can pull all of those different specialists and workers together to retrofit an entire home in a lot of different ways for you in a way that feels cohesive. And so the question was, are there contractors that are available that offer those services? And to maybe begin to answer that question, I would say that I think similar to policy, we definitely can vote in the market with our money, with our wallets. So if we start to have conversations with contractors that are existing that aren't providing those services in the valley, maybe they'll begin to catch on and start to offer those services. But I would imagine that we have a bit of a ways to go.
So I've been advocating for years for a home retrofit program organized similar to the Solarized Blaine program that was done here a number of years ago, with exactly that idea in mind. So there would be auditors, there would be contractors, there would be solar installers, all involved in this program. So the people that buy into the idea and understand the idea and how the different pieces of the puzzle fit together, and then that it could be done in a way like the Solarized Blaine, where there was actually a cost savings because it was done on such a large scale. I think that would be a huge opportunity for this community. It hasn't been able to be implemented yet. So no, I don't think there's anybody. Your energy audit will quantify what's the best bang for your buck and where you should start, but then you are dealing with your plumber, dealing with your carpenter, dealing with your solar guy, and there are a few general contractors who know more about it than others, but I don't think there's anybody at this point a go-to guy or gal.
The Canopy is trying to meet that need a little bit because their program is populated with local contractors who have done work, and then they even potentially you could negotiate discounts, but it still does involve you working with multiple contractors. But I think it's trying to meet that need.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can speak on that too a little bit, just from a business perspective also, right? So our business, we're a fully licensed electrical contractor. We just specialize in solar installations, right? So from a business perspective, I think there's an issue with spreading yourself too thin and not being an expert in each field, which makes me a little nervous, right? So I don't want to jump in and have my guys and just hire a whole section of this business to go in and do plumbing when we're really good at just electrical, right? And that type of work. So I totally see that as an issue. And I think that's where people get upset with any sort of retrofit or remodel in general, is they normally hire a GC who then subs everything out to all these other people, and then there's people in their house that they don't know where they even were hired from, and it gets confusing, right? So I think I see both sides of that. It would be super nice to have someone come in and be like, here's your energy audit, here's 5 different contractors or one that you can go through that'll solve these issues for you. But I do think that the solar industry in general already has some like snake oil companies that set a bad example, right? And they're knocking on doors and not educating people and hurting our industry really poorly. And so I think that's a huge issue. But I can totally see an area where like we can, as a company, we can do better in providing you with like trusted partners and making that as streamlined as possible. So I think that's a super good option and something we should definitely work on.
Eve?
I have a question kind of to do with land use conflict between conservation and energy, or like private agricultural land and energy, and I'm just kind of curious how you deal with that. I know I've seen studies that are talking about how the majority of Idaho's solar and wind, like more centralized like areas, are all on private agricultural land, and I'm curious how you deal with that.
So quickly to repeat Eve's question for folks watching later. So Eve's question was about managing conflict, or not necessarily conflict, but managing how to move towards renewable energy when the best places to construct that renewable energy is on private or agricultural land. And I think that this also is applicable to public land that people feel really passionate about protecting the ecosystems of. We have a lot of beautiful public land in Idaho as well, and so yeah, how does it work when renewable energy is going on private agricultural land or land that we want to protect?
Yeah, this is such a hard question, and it really is one of balance and balancing. There is no easy solution. All energy exacts a price. Mining, pollution, extraction, carbon, etc. Renewables are no exception. They also have critical minerals involved that have a footprint and ecological impact of their own. They have an installed area that is very real. And again, these are going to be closer to us than we're used to in Idaho. And so, yeah, I mean, I say the word will frequently, and I have, and I think that word comes from just how stark the economics are and how clear it is that like building out renewables at scale is going to happen. How it happens is an open question. Where we put it is an open question. This country has a sordid history of putting industrial sites next to our most vulnerable communities, tribal, minority, low income, etc., however you want to cut it. And we've seen concerning trends of renewables doing a little bit of the same, and we need to be mindful of that, you know, the inertia puts these in the lowest financial monetary cost areas, which can have harms to people and ecology. And ag land is important. It's critical. And so it's a question of balance and compensation and how do we structure these vital public resources. The grid is a public resource that is privately owned and operated in many ways. And so I think there's some tension there that needs to be resolved. Idaho is getting its first taste of these large renewable projects. Other places have many. We've seen some proposals. Idaho Conservation League has been involved in them and commented throughout and worked with BLM on some public siting and it's difficult. There is no easy solution. We need gigawatt scale renewables at the end of the day. I don't know where to put that. I don't think any one agency, any one person has a good idea of how to do that nationwide. There are so many bodies working on this problem that I think it's going to be an iterative and evolutionary process. And there's so many stakeholders, and I think that that's where this idea of engagement and being aware comes across. And for our organization, we're shifting more and more of our thought towards this. You know, in the past, we've been a public lands organization to preserve, to save the sage grouse, to like do these big like landscape scale conservation organizations, and we will stay that. But we also recognize that land has a part of the climate solution and problem, and so we need to balance it. And yeah, it ain't easy. If that's a rambling non-answer, that's the best I got.
That was a really good question, Eve. Thank you.
I would say just bringing different perspectives together too, right? Like bringing people that are building solar farms and people that are, all they do is try to conserve land for, let's say, like, what is it, deer that are going over the freeway or whatever it is for. And I think if you bring those different perspectives together, that's when you get creative ideas where we're gonna have to live with these, whatever systems we create. How do we integrate them into nature as easily as possible so it doesn't disrupt them, but it just becomes a part of their world too. I think that's where some like fun creative solutions lie. But I don't think there is. Yeah, we're not just gonna have, if we could live off of grass producing energy, that would be amazing. But I think we're getting there slowly.
Yes.
You three have at several points mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. And I apologize for sounding stupid, but the question we often get is, how do I get the money? Where's the money? Who's going to deliver the money? I'd be interested, is there something, I don't want to put you three on the spot, but is there somebody that we should talk to find out basic answers about how the IRA is going to work?
Yeah,
sorry, really quick to repeat Rob's question. It was about the accessibility of the Inflation Reduction Act, and I will say, as somebody who recently applied for a grant through this, can be very daunting and feel very complicated. So the question was, is there kind of a go-to place to get started learning how funds are accessible and how to access those funds?
So I can only speak on like REAP grants and stuff related to solar in general, because that's just where I've spent most of my time. But I would say a lot of it is so new that it's very difficult to even know how it's going to come down the line, right? So I think April 1st, there was a big nationwide meeting on what was going on with the REAP grants and how that system was going to get restructured. And it did get restructured. There is information online. But typically how it works is it's pretty hard to fill out the grant information if you haven't done it 3 or 4 times, right? Because there is a large instruction sheet of what needs to be done. But typically the money comes, at least for REAP grants, through the USDA. And it's not difficult. It is a government program. There is a bunch of stuff that you have to go through and figure out. But I think as soon as these have been around for a little and we've applied for them multiple times, there are resources available where they can go, like, I can go help you apply for whatever this is what you're looking for. But I think there needs to be more people in the community that are willing to do that. And it's so new that there is a lot to learn.
I would say, to add to that, I think Quinn made a really good point in stating that we can be really valuable to each other as resources in that process for applying to these mostly USDA grants. And so that's what my team and I did when we applied for our grant. We're still waiting to hear back, but we were in touch with another organization that had previously applied and found success. So I think, asking around and not being afraid to ask for help, because, there is a huge budget for these grants. And so, asking for help from other community members can be an amazing tool.
So there is, as far as the homeowners tax credit money, that money is you get basically when you file your taxes at the end of the year. It's a reduction in your taxes. So you have, it's tax credit. You have to owe taxes in order to reap the benefits of that money. There is some money for low income people also. And their programs are still under development, so there's going to be more coming. There's good information on energy.gov, and I, as part of the climate action planning team, stakeholder team, the county's website has done a pretty good job of having that sort of information, but now that we have Andrew Metzger coming on board, that may need some updating, but I think that would be probably a good resource for finding information about how you personally could take advantage of that money.
So regular homeowner.
Right now,
We keep hearing all this money. It's like, whoa.
right, and I've done a ton of research for my own home. Right now, it is just for. I mean, right now the money is pretty much just for homeowners and for very, very low income people. And as I said, they're just still working on developing the programs, but I think locally our best bet would be to get the county sustainability coordinator on it and make sure that information is available at our fingertips so that we can take advantage of that.
Yeah, so as a homeowner, typically, right, the law is written for individuals that have high tax liability, right? If you're not paying taxes come every April, this 30% tax credit for whatever it may be, solar or just energy efficiency upgrades, it's not available to you, right? So you'd have to change, it gets complicated, right? You'd have to change your entire withholdings to not withhold any money if you're a W-2 employee. So you're building a tax liability come April. But I mean, that's the main point, is that these laws were written for people that are bringing in a lot of money personally. But as the REAP grants too, it's for agricultural communities and rural communities that are businesses. So, and that's my knowledge of the REAP grant. Besides, I think homeowners can do energy efficiency upgrades. I don't know where that money comes back from, but the REAP grant, it's coming through the USDA, and then the 30% tax credit, which most people are taking advantage of, is just owed tax liability. You just won't end up owing taxes at the end of the year.
Scott?
Do you recommend, with Idaho Power's changing their net metering rules, and also it sounds like giving potentially more money if you add energy to the grid at the peak times, to get batteries storage with your solar, or to add, I have solar panels on my house, and is that
Yeah.
So, sorry, so Scott's question was about the benefit of batteries when you have solar on your residential property, especially with recent changes to net metering from Idaho Power.
Yeah, so I mean, it's going to be behavioral change as well, right? So like I said, west-facing roofs are going to become much more viable solutions because it's going to produce energy in those peak times. But the problem is, and what Idaho Power is creating is now they're changing your behaviors to consume all of that energy in real time when you get home, and it's not being sent to the grid, right? So like the program right now, you're essentially using the grid as a battery. You're just sending energy wherever you want because it doesn't matter. But what they're gonna end up doing, which I don't think they realize, is that if all of your energy is being produced in the afternoon when you come home and you don't want to sell it to the grid at a lower rate, you're just going to consume it as much as possible, which is good as a consumer, right? That means you're using the clean energy that you paid for and that you produced. But the problem is now you have whatever 2% of the ratepayers, all that energy is not going into the grid, right? It's making the grid weaker instead of where it was almost like stabilizing it before. So that's going to be something that's interesting. I would recommend, if you're going to install solar right now currently, make sure that you have the capacity on your inverters or your roof to add extra panels, right? So if you need 10 or let's say 5 to 7 extra panels to compensate for this rate change, and then you can just keep net metering how you already are doing. That's an option. The other option is installing batteries and having this excess generation going to replenishing your battery well every day, right? And then when you get home, you use as much as your battery power as possible so you're not selling it back to the grid. So if you do that effectively, you're probably only 10% of your investment will be affected from the net metering change, but batteries are expensive. Batteries are 16, 20 grand. So currently batteries just sit there waiting for grid failure because there's no reason to use them every day. But batteries will become more financially, you'll see a financial gain from using a battery once this change happens.
And I'd agree with everything Quinn just ran through. I think it's really going to depend on the individual system, individual use profile, and financial resources, whoever's operating. To look into it, the docket is open at the PUC. The number is ICP E2311, and man, I can talk about it all day. But you know, I think this will be a big change. I think with the evening peak hours, it really does make it a lot more dynamic system, and batteries, you know, are a really marginal system in Idaho at this point. It's just really not a very well penetrated technology. In 5 years, that story will be different. And so what we'll be advocating for is a specific schedule and a specific program for solar plus storage. Individually, they behave differently. I think Quinn spoke well to that. In aggregate, it is a powerful combination to reduce load across the grid, cost-wise to the system, distribution, transmission, the whole lot. And so I think that that's something that we're going to start laying the groundwork for. I don't think it'll make much progress in this docket, but in the subsequent one, incrementally, you start with a whisper, then you speak in a speaking voice, and eventually you take action. And so in the next 5 years, I'm optimistic that we'll have a better program in Idaho to integrate batteries. It's going to be a huge deal. One of those things I'm excited about. But
really with, I know people now with like their Ford electric pickup truck that's like wired to be your battery storage. And so people, it seems like more cars will start having that capability.
yeah, and I think that that's sort of the penetration coming forward, like that technology sort of maturing and evolving. You know, EVs are one thing in the Bay Area, they're a whole nother different thing in Idaho County. But in the year 2030, that's going to look very different. And so how do we prepare that regulatory framework for that? You're absolutely right. Batteries come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. Some of them stick to walls. Some of them drive down the street. They all kind of work about the same. So there's, again, with 50 states having different policies, there are pilot programs with really, really encouraging numbers coming out of them that says solar plus storage is a powerful combination to solve many of those sort of time use, time generation issues with renewables writ large.
I can speak about the electrical vehicle integration too, right? So like backwards compatibility. it's like marketed through the Ford Lightning, but the actual integration when installing it into your home, like these two entities, they need to be able to speak to each other, right? So that's where it's going to be really difficult to actually solve that issue. I think it's coming down the line 100%. I don't know how much like just solo home backup batteries, I don't know if that's going to be the future or not, but I know for sure that that's going to be coming down the line. When that will actually be available, I don't know, but that's going to be another problem that we have to solve. But it is, I mean, I think there's a ton of potential for super cool ways to integrate that into our community in general too, whether it's like electric buses that are taking people to and from school, and then all of a sudden you can plug that entire system into like run a whole community also. But yeah, I would say a lot of it's gonna change, but as long as you're thinking about and how, if you know what's coming and how to prepare for it, I think no matter what Idaho Power does, like there's a solution that you can find.
And I think a lot of those solutions are being developed elsewhere, and we don't need to invent them. San Diego, the San Diego utilities already dealing with this, with behind the meter batteries, and they had to jump on dealing with those behind the meter batteries because they were losing control of the energy and where it was going, and their knowledge of what the system was doing. And so that technology and that know-how is out there, and Idaho comes along slowly.
We'll take one or two more questions if there are any more. Yes?
I've had solar panels for 17 years, but I don't understand the change in the net metering.
So this question was, this audience member has had solar panels for 17 years and wants a little bit of an explanation on the change in net metering that has happened recently.
Yeah, so currently, right, your system, like during the day, is going to be producing a lot of power, right? And if you're not directly consuming that power in your home, that's going to be going towards the grid. And your meter on your house can run forwards and backwards, so it knows how much power your system is sending into the grid. And currently, Idaho Power puts a value on that, right? So if you send 1 kilowatt of energy to the grid, then they're going to credit you a single kilowatt back on your account, right? So say you're gone all day and your solar system produced 10 kilowatts of energy and it sent it to the grid. You come home and you turn all your stuff on, you're running around in your house, you're doing laundry. Now you have 10 kilowatts of credits that you're going to be using on your account as your solar system is producing nothing, right? So that 1-to-1 ratio has been like the best program in the nation for a while, and that's going to be changing. So now if you send a single kilowatt to the grid, it'll be valued at a third or half. That's the number where we don't really know what it's going to hit yet, but it's not going to be we're going to lose that battle. It's not going to be a 1-to-1 anymore.
But you're
right?
good, Sue.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is correct. Yeah, yeah. Your grandmother did. So for you, it's not going to change at all, right? So I think, what is it, 2018, 2019? If you installed before then they cannot affect your rate.
So the value that
So-
we sell to them, they get back.
Yep, it's going to be totally equal for your situation. Sorry about that. No,
25 years.
yeah.
25 years, that's good to know. Okay. Any last questions? Elizabeth?
I understood, I'm very confused about the time of use as far as net metering goes. I read an article that was using a lot of terminology in ways that I wouldn't have used it, so it didn't make any sense to me. That 3 o'clock in the afternoon to 7 o'clock, the high use time was actually going to change the price the power company pays you for your solar as well as charging other people for more. Is that correct?
So Elizabeth's question was about time of use and how time of use impacts the value of your solar energy or what you're charged for power in general.
Yeah, that person using all the technical terms, that might have been me. It's a weird gig. But But yeah, I think fundamentally you're right. So it is true. Power is less valuable when people aren't using it. Solar overproduces when the sun is straight up in the sky and there's not enough people switching on their blenders at noon, essentially, is what it boils down to. So there is a price differential. It is real. It is causing cost shifting, and I acknowledge that. And so what this proposal does is for non-peak hours, which is pretty much everything outside of summer, it operates at one rate, which is going to be somewhere around the 6-ish cents an hour range. And then during summer, the idea is to shift everyone's production so those solar panels can send power out to the grid by compensating you at a pretty high rate, a really encouraging rate of about 20 cents an hour. And then on the off-peak hours, it's closer to 4 or 5. So what that incents distributed solar users to do is cool the house down in the morning and the noon when your solar panels are really producing. But when your neighbors who don't have panels need that power, turn off the AC. Don't charge your car. You know, tamp down on, like, you know, these things that you can control so you can export grid back or power back to the grid and gain some financial benefit from that peak rate. So the time of use rate, it makes a lot of sense when you're a producer. There will be an optional time of use rate for non-solar users, for just straight consumers, which I see as a benefit. And so I think fundamentally you're right. This solar one is a big change. I think it's one that's adaptable and is doable. There are parts of this application I'm less enthusiastic about. The shift to a TOU rate, time of use, is a really big step forward for this state. So.
And someone who's grandmothered in on the old one-to-one system, does this time of use apply at all?
Yeah, so part of the history of this net metering, what's really become like a saga, in 2018 they sort of crystallized everyone that had systems at that time. They knew there was going to be big changes, so when they issued that order, I forget the number of it, they said everyone that's got panels right now and is hooked up to the Idaho Power system, no changes for 25 years. And that's a pretty small subset. I forget the exact numbers, but it's less than 1% of customers. The industry is growing. We see it growing further. So that will be a minority going forward who do have that one-to-one preserved. And
stay one-to-one, there will be no time of use?
No.
Okay.
Unless for some reason you should so choose. But, yeah.
And I think with that, we will wrap up. Thank you so much to Haley Public Library for collaborating and contributing to this event. Thank you to all of our audience members for attending and for your very insightful questions. Huge thank you to our panelists, some of whom are not local and traveled from other parts of the state to be here. And yeah, we will stick around for a little bit to continue to answer questions. Please feel free to connect with each other. There are some great climate minds in this room. I'd like to plug a couple of things. So 5Be Resilient is one of the newer programs of the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience. It's our most geographically consolidated program, so we work solely in Blaine County. If you'd like to join our email list, there's a sign-up sheet in the back. There are also 2 book recommendation lists in the back if you'd like to take a picture. One is a general list, and one is a list of books that are available at Haley Public Library to check out. I'd also like to plug a Climate Action Coalition event that is upcoming. So on August 3rd, there'll be an event right here, again at 5:30, titled Conversations on Climate Solutions. And the new Sustainability Director for Blaine County, Andrew Metzner, is going to be here to introduce himself and talk about the updated and ongoing climate action plan for the county. The last thing I want to say is that if you feel so inclined to stay up really late this evening, there's a chance that you'll be able to see the northern lights. So, yeah, so little of a chance, but a small chance. And thank you again for being here.
Turn the switch off and set it on.
Thank you. Great. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Yeah, that was great.